Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished cleaning the last rifle in the armory. The military base in Nevada was scorching hot even in the early morning hours. She had been working as a civilian weapons maintenance technician for 3 years now, and every day brought the same routine of cleaning, inspecting, and cataloging firearms. The job paid well enough to support her younger brother's college tuition, which was all that mattered to her. Sarah had given up her own dreams of joining the military after their parents died in a car accident 5 years ago. Someone had to take care of Miguel, and she was all he had left. As she locked up the last weapon cabinet, the heavy doors of the armory swung open with a loud clang. Admiral Robert Harrison strode in, his perfectly pressed uniform gleaming with medals and ribbons. Behind him walked 2 junior officers who looked nervous and kept checking their watches. Sarah had heard about Admiral Harrison but had never seen him in person. He was a legend in the Navy, known for his strategic brilliance during several overseas operations. What she hadn't expected was how intimidating he would be in real life. The man stood over 6 feet tall with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "Technician Martinez," the Admiral said, reading her name tag. His voice was deep and commanding. "I need to inspect the new Barrett M82 that arrived yesterday." Sarah nodded and led him to the special weapons section. The Barrett M82 was a massive 50-caliber sniper rifle, designed for long-range precision shooting. It was primarily used for disabling vehicles and equipment, but in the right hands, it could hit targets over a mile away. As she unlocked the cabinet, Admiral Harrison began explaining to his officers about an upcoming demonstration for foreign military officials. "We need to show them the accuracy and power of American military equipment," he said. "The reputation of our armed forces depends on flawless execution." Sarah carefully removed the Barrett from its case. The rifle weighed nearly 30 pounds and was over 4 feet long. She had maintained dozens of these weapons but always admired their engineering. Every component was built for maximum precision and reliability. "Have you ever fired one of these, technician?" Admiral Harrison asked suddenly. The question caught Sarah off guard. "No, sir, I'm just maintenance staff. I've never actually shot any of the weapons I work on." The Admiral studied her face carefully. "But you know how they work, correct? You understand their mechanisms and capabilities?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "I know every part of this rifle inside and out. I could disassemble and reassemble it blindfolded if needed." One of the junior officers whispered something to the Admiral, who nodded thoughtfully. Sarah continued her inspection, checking the scope mounts and ensuring the barrel was perfectly clean. She had always been meticulous in her work, treating each weapon as if lives depended on its performance. "Technician Martinez," Admiral Harrison said after a few minutes of silence. "What's your background before this job?" Sarah hesitated. She didn't like talking about her personal life, especially with high-ranking officers. "I was studying mechanical engineering before I took this position, sir. I've always been good with my hands and understanding how things work." "Any shooting experience?" he pressed. "Some hunting with my father when I was younger," she admitted. "Nothing military or professional." The Admiral exchanged glances with his officers again. There seemed to be some kind of silent communication happening that Sarah wasn't part of. She finished her inspection and began returning the rifle to its case. "Wait," Admiral Harrison said suddenly. "I want you to come to the demonstration tomorrow." Sarah looked up in surprise. "Sir, I'm not qualified to attend military demonstrations. I'm just civilian staff. You're the technician who maintains these weapons," he replied firmly. "If there are any mechanical issues during the demonstration, we'll need someone who knows the equipment inside and out." One of the junior officers looked uncomfortable. "Admiral, sir, the demonstration is for foreign officials. Security protocols require—" "I'll handle the security clearance," Admiral Harrison cut him off. "Technician Martinez will be there as technical support." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had never been invited to any official military events before. Her job usually kept her in the background, invisible and unnoticed. "Sir, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm not sure what help I could be," she said honestly. Admiral Harrison stepped closer, and Sarah could see the intensity in his eyes. "Technician, in my experience, the people who truly understand equipment are often the ones who work with it every day, not just the ones who shoot it occasionally." The comment seemed directed at his officers as much as at Sarah. She sensed there was more to this invitation than simple technical support. "What exactly will the demonstration involve?" she asked. Long-range precision shooting with various targets, Admiral Harrison explained. We need to show that our equipment and training are superior to anything our allies or potential enemies possess. Sarah nodded, though she still felt uncertain about her role. I'll do whatever I can to help, sir. As the Admiral and his officers prepared to leave, he turned back to Sarah one final time. Technician, I have a feeling tomorrow will be more interesting than you expect. After they left, Sarah stood alone in the armory, staring at the Barrett M82. Something about the Admiral's words and the way he looked at her made her think this demonstration would be different from anything she had experienced before. She spent the rest of the day thinking about what might happen tomorrow. The Admiral had seemed almost like he was testing her, asking questions that went beyond simple technical knowledge. There was an intensity in his manner that suggested this demonstration was more important than just showing off equipment to foreign visitors. That evening, Sarah called her brother Miguel to tell him she might be late coming home the next day. She didn't mention the demonstration or the Admiral's invitation, not wanting to worry him. Miguel was focused on his engineering finals and didn't need distractions. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah found herself wondering why Admiral Harrison had really invited her. She had maintained weapons for 3 years without any recognition or special attention. What had changed? And why did she have the feeling that tomorrow would somehow alter the course of her life? The next morning arrived with clear skies and scorching desert heat. Sarah arrived at the designated area 2 hours early, wanting to ensure all equipment was properly prepared. The demonstration site was located in a remote section of the base, with a firing range that stretched nearly 2 miles across the Nevada desert. Military personnel were setting up tables, chairs, and observation equipment under large camouflage tents. Sarah watched as soldiers carefully positioned targets at various distances, some so far away they appeared as tiny dots on the horizon. The furthest targets were placed at distances that seemed impossible to hit with any accuracy. Admiral Harrison arrived with a convoy of black vehicles carrying the foreign military officials. Sarah counted representatives from at least 8 different countries, all wearing their formal military uniforms decorated with unfamiliar medals and insignia. They spoke in various languages, but she could sense their skeptical attitudes even without understanding their words. The demonstration began with smaller caliber weapons, working up through different rifle systems. Each American marksman performed adequately, hitting targets at respectable distances. However, Sarah noticed that the foreign officials didn't seem particularly impressed. They had likely seen similar demonstrations in their own countries. When they reached the Barrett M82 portion of the demonstration, Admiral Harrison personally took charge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in English while translators repeated his words, "you are about to witness the pinnacle of American long-range precision technology." The designated marksman was Sergeant Thompson, a decorated sniper with years of combat experience. Sarah had met him briefly when he came to the armory for equipment familiarization. He was confident and professional, exactly the type of soldier you would expect for such an important demonstration. Sergeant Thompson took his position behind the Barrett, adjusting the scope and checking wind conditions. The first target was placed at 1 to 200 yards, a challenging but achievable distance for an experienced sniper. He took his time, controlled his breathing, and fired. The shot missed the center by several inches. Sarah saw Admiral Harrison's jaw tighten slightly, though he maintained his composed expression. The foreign officials murmured among themselves, and she caught a few words that sounded like criticism in languages she didn't recognize. The second shot was better, hitting closer to the target center, but still not the perfect accuracy that Admiral Harrison had promised. By the third shot, which also missed the bullseye, Sarah could see the Admiral's frustration growing. During a brief break, Admiral Harrison approached Sergeant Thompson for a quiet conversation. Sarah couldn't hear their words, but the body language suggested the Admiral was not satisfied with the performance. The foreign officials were now openly discussing what they had seen, and their tone didn't sound complimentary. When the demonstration resumed, Sergeant Thompson attempted shots at even longer distances. The 500-yard target proved extremely challenging, and he missed it completely on his first attempt. The second shot hit the target, but nowhere near the center ring that would demonstrate true precision. Sarah watched from her position near the equipment table, feeling embarrassed for the American military. These foreign officials had traveled thousands of miles to see superior American marksmanship, and instead they were witnessing a series of mediocre performances. One of the foreign officers, a tall man with a thick accent that sounded European, made a comment loud enough for others to hear. Although Sarah didn't understand his language, his dismissive tone was universal. Several other officials laughed in response. Admiral Harrison's face remained stoic, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. This demonstration was supposed to showcase American military superiority, but instead it was becoming an international embarrassment. During another break, the Admiral walked over to where Sarah was standing. "Technician Martinez, I need you to inspect the rifle," he said quietly. "Find out if there's a mechanical issue affecting accuracy." Sarah nodded and approached the Barrett. She performed a thorough inspection while Sergeant Thompson stood nearby, clearly frustrated with his performance. The rifle was functioning perfectly. Every component was properly aligned, the barrel was clean, and the scope was correctly calibrated. "Sir, the weapon is operating within normal parameters," she reported to Admiral Harrison. "There are no mechanical issues that would affect accuracy." The Admiral stared at the rifle for a long moment, then looked at the distant targets shimmering in the desert heat. Sarah could almost see him calculating options and considering alternatives. "Technician," he said suddenly, "you mentioned you had some shooting experience with your father." "Yes, sir. But nothing like this," Sarah replied quickly. "I've never shot anything this powerful or at these distances." "But you understand the principles," Admiral Harrison pressed. "You know how the rifle works, how to account for wind and distance." Sarah felt a growing sense of unease. "In theory, yes, sir. But practical application is completely different from technical knowledge." The foreign officials were becoming restless, checking their watches and speaking among themselves with increasing frequency. Sarah heard one of them mention something about scheduling flights home earlier than planned. Admiral Harrison made a decision that surprised everyone, including his own officers. "Technician Martinez, I want you to take a shot." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, I'm not qualified." "I'm not military personnel. I've never—" "You're the person who maintains these weapons," Admiral Harrison interrupted. "You know this rifle better than anyone here. Sometimes understanding equipment is more important than years of training with inferior knowledge." Sergeant Thompson looked shocked and slightly offended. The foreign officials had stopped their conversations and were now watching this unexpected development with curiosity. "Admiral, sir," one of his officers interjected, "this is highly irregular. Civilian personnel aren't authorized to—" "I'm authorizing it," Admiral Harrison said firmly. "Technician Martinez, step up to the firing line." Sarah's heart began racing. She looked at the massive Barrett M82, then at the distant targets that seemed impossibly small. Every person at the demonstration was now watching her, waiting to see what would happen when a civilian maintenance worker attempted to do what a trained military sniper had struggled with. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. This wasn't just about hitting targets anymore. It was about American military reputation, international relationships, and Admiral Harrison's career. And somehow, inexplicably, it now depended on her. Sarah took a deep breath and approached the rifle, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she approached the Barrett M82. The rifle suddenly seemed much larger and more intimidating than when she was simply maintaining it in the armory. Every eye at the demonstration was focused on her, and she could feel the weight of their expectations and skepticism. Admiral Harrison walked beside her, speaking in a low voice that only she could hear. "Technician, forget about everyone watching. Forget about the pressure. Just focus on what you know about this weapon." Sarah nodded, though her mouth felt dry and her pulse was racing. She had watched Sergeant Thompson's technique carefully during his attempts, noting how he positioned himself and handled the rifle. But watching and doing were completely different things. The Barrett was already positioned on its bipod, aimed roughly toward the target range. Sarah lay down behind it, trying to remember everything she had observed about proper shooting stance. The rifle was heavier than anything she had ever handled, and its size made her feel small and inadequate. "Take your time," Admiral Harrison said. "There's no rush. Get comfortable with the weapon first." Sarah adjusted her position, trying to find a natural point of aim. She had read about this concept in technical manuals, the idea that the rifle should naturally point toward the target when the shooter was properly aligned. It took several minutes of small adjustments before she felt somewhat stable. The foreign officials were murmuring among themselves, and she caught fragments of conversation in English from some of them. "Unusual approach," one said. "Never seen civilian personnel at military demonstration," commented another. Their tone suggested they viewed this as either desperation or some kind of elaborate American trick. Through the scope, Sarah could see the 1 in 200-yard target that had given Sergeant Thompson trouble. It appeared much larger through the powerful optics, but she knew that even a small movement of the rifle would translate to missing the target by feet at that distance. She began going through the technical checklist she had memorized from maintaining these rifles. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, target distance, bullet drop compensation, all factors that affected accuracy. Her mechanical engineering background helped her understand the physics involved, even if she lacked practical experience applying them. "What do you see?" Admiral Harrison asked quietly. "The target is clear," Sarah replied, "but I can see heat shimmer that will affect the bullet path. Wind appears to be coming from the northwest at maybe 8 to 10 miles per hour." Admiral Harrison nodded approvingly. "Good observation. Trust your technical knowledge." Sarah made adjustments to the scope, calculating the necessary compensation for distance and wind. Her hands were steadier now that she was focused on the technical aspects rather than the social pressure. This was just another mechanical problem to solve, like the countless repairs and calibrations she had performed over the past 3 years. She took a deep breath and settled into position, feeling the rifle's weight distribute across her body. The trigger felt different from the smaller rifles she had used while hunting with her father. It required more pressure and had a longer pull before the firing pin would release. "Whenever you're ready," Admiral Harrison said. "Don't overthink it." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. When she opened them and looked through the scope again, everything seemed clearer and more focused. The target stood out sharply against the desert background. She began the firing sequence she had read about countless times. Control breathing. Find natural respiratory pause. Apply steady pressure to trigger. Her finger slowly squeezed the trigger, taking up the slack until she felt the point where continued pressure would fire the rifle. The Barrett M82 fired with an enormous roar that surprised Sarah even though she was expecting it. The recoil was tremendous, pushing back against her shoulder with much more force than she had anticipated. For a moment she lost sight of the target entirely as the rifle moved under the impact. When she regained her sight picture through the scope, she couldn't immediately see where her shot had hit. The target appeared unchanged from her perspective. A sinking feeling developed in her stomach as she realized she had probably missed completely, just like some of Sergeant Thompson's attempts. But then she heard Admiral Harrison's voice, and his tone was different from before. "Outstanding shot, technician. Dead center?" Sarah looked up from the scope in confusion. "Sir?" One of the spotters near the target area was signaling with flags, confirming the hit location. Admiral Harrison was smiling for the first time during the entire demonstration. Even more surprising, the foreign officials had stopped their casual conversations and were paying close attention. "You hit the bullseye," Admiral Harrison explained. "Perfect center shot at 1,200 yards." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. She had expected to miss by yards, not hit the center of the target. The success felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. "I want you to try the 1,500-yard target," Admiral Harrison said. "The one that gave our sniper difficulty." The suggestion terrified and excited Sarah simultaneously. The 1,500-yard target was at the extreme range of what the Barrett was designed for. Even experienced snipers considered it a challenging shot under ideal conditions. "Sir, I'm not sure I can repeat that performance," Sarah said honestly. "That might have been beginner's luck." "Or it might have been competence," Admiral Harrison replied. "Let's find out." The foreign officials were now watching intently, their previous dismissive attitudes replaced by genuine curiosity. Sarah noticed that several of them had moved closer to get a better view of this unexpected development. Sarah adjusted her position and began the process of ranging the more distant target. Through the scope, it appeared much smaller and less distinct than the 1,200-yard target. Heat shimmer was more pronounced at the greater distance, making precise aiming more difficult. She spent several minutes calculating the additional bullet drop and wind compensation needed for the longer shot. The mathematics involved were complex, requiring her to account for the curved trajectory of the bullet and the increased effect of environmental factors over the extended range. "Take your time," Admiral Harrison encouraged. Use everything you know about the equipment. As Sarah prepared for her second shot, she realized that Admiral Harrison had been right about one thing. Her technical knowledge of the rifle was helping her understand what needed to be done. She might not have years of shooting experience, but she understood the weapon's capabilities and limitations better than most people who used it. The question was whether understanding would be enough to achieve the impossible accuracy that Admiral Harrison seemed to expect from her. Sarah steadied herself behind the Barrett, staring through the scope at the 2,500-yard target. It seemed impossibly small and distant, wavering in the heat shimmer that rose from the desert floor. She could feel sweat beating on her forehead despite the morning coolness, and her heart was beating so hard she worried it might affect her aim. The foreign officials had moved even closer now, forming a semicircle behind her position. She could hear them speaking in hushed tones, their skepticism mixed with growing interest. One of them, speaking accented English, said to his companion, "This is either brilliant theater or we are witnessing something remarkable." Admiral Harrison knelt beside her, his voice calm and encouraging. "Don't let the distance intimidate you. The principles are the same as the shorter shot. Trust your calculations." Sarah nodded and began her mental checklist again. The wind had shifted slightly, now coming more directly from the west. She adjusted her aim point to compensate, moving the crosshair several inches to the left of the target center. The bullet drop at this distance would be significant, requiring her to aim well above the target to account for gravity's effect. She controlled her breathing, waiting for the natural pause between breaths that would provide the steadiest moment to fire. The trigger pressure felt familiar now after her first shot, and she applied it gradually, smoothly, without jerking or rushing. The Barrett roared again, its massive report echoing across the desert. The recoil was just as powerful as before, but Sarah was better prepared for it this time. She managed to stay on target and watch through the scope as the bullet traveled downrange. For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. Then the spotters' flags moved, signaling another center hit. The foreign officials erupted in surprised conversation. Admiral Harrison's smile was now unmistakable, and even his normally stoic officers were showing expressions of amazement. Sarah stared through the scope in disbelief, unable to comprehend that she had just made 2 perfect shots at distances that challenged experienced military snipers. "Exceptional," Admiral Harrison said, loud enough for the foreign officials to hear. "But I think our demonstration should continue. Let's try something more challenging." Sarah looked at him with alarm. "Sir, more challenging than 1,500 yards?" "The 1,800-yard target," Admiral Harrison replied. "At that distance, we're pushing the absolute limits of what this weapon system can achieve." Several of the foreign officials exchanged glances. One of them, a stern-looking man with graying temples, stepped forward. "Admiral Harrison, forgive my directness, but this is quite extraordinary. This young woman has just accomplished what many of our best marksmen would find difficult. American training and equipment," Admiral Harrison replied diplomatically, though Sarah knew her success had nothing to do with formal training. "Would you like to see what our technology can really do?" The challenge was clear. Admiral Harrison was using her unexpected success to demonstrate American military superiority. Sarah realized she had become a pawn in a much larger game of international military politics. The 1,800-yard target was positioned at the very edge of the visible range. Through the scope, it was barely more than a speck against the desert landscape. Sarah knew from her technical training that the bullet would take several seconds to reach the target, during which time wind and other factors could push it significantly off course. She spent 10 minutes calculating the shot, using every piece of technical knowledge she possessed. The mathematics involved were at the limits of her engineering education. Bullet velocity, air density, wind speed and direction, target distance, gravitational drop, all had to be precisely calculated and translated into scope adjustments. "This is an extremely difficult shot," she told Admiral Harrison quietly. "Even with perfect calculations, there are factors I can't control." "I understand," he replied. "Do your best. That's all anyone can ask." As Sarah prepared for the third shot, she noticed something had changed in the atmosphere around the demonstration. The foreign officials were no longer casual observers. They were now studying every aspect of her technique, the equipment, and the conditions. Whatever happened with this shot would significantly impact their assessment of American military capabilities. She settled into position, making minute adjustments to her stance and grip. The rifle felt more familiar now, like a precision instrument rather than an intimidating weapon. Her engineering background helped her visualize the trajectory and environmental factors affecting the bullet's path. The crosshairs wavered slightly in the scope as she applied trigger pressure. At this distance, even the smallest movement could result in a miss by several feet. She forced herself to relax, treating this like any other technical problem that required precision and careful execution. The Barrett fired for the third time, its thunderous report rolling across the desert. Sarah maintained her position, watching through the scope as the bullet arced through the superheated air toward the distant target. The wait seemed endless. At 1,800 yards, the bullet's flight time was long enough for doubt to creep into Sarah's mind. She began to worry that she had pushed her luck too far, that this shot would finally reveal her as an inexperienced amateur who had briefly gotten lucky. Then the spotter's flags moved again, signaling another center hit. The foreign officials fell silent for a moment before breaking into animated discussion. Sarah heard fragments of conversation in multiple languages, but the tone was universal. They were impressed and perhaps concerned about what they had witnessed. Admiral Harrison stood up, addressing the group formally. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just observed the precision capabilities of American military technology in the hands of properly trained personnel." The description of Sarah as properly trained personnel was generous, but she understood the diplomatic necessity. Admiral Harrison was using her success to project an image of comprehensive American military excellence. One of the foreign officials, the stern man who had spoken earlier, approached Admiral Harrison. 3 perfect shots at extreme range is remarkable by any standard. We would be interested in understanding your training methods. Our training emphasizes technical understanding, combined with practical application, Admiral Harrison replied smoothly. Knowledge of equipment capabilities is just as important as shooting experience. Sarah realized that Admiral Harrison was being truthful in an indirect way. Her technical knowledge had indeed been crucial to her success. But she also knew that luck and perhaps natural ability had played significant roles. As the foreign officials continued their discussions, Admiral Harrison turned back to Sarah. "Are you ready for one more demonstration?" Sarah looked at him with growing anxiety. "Sir, what did you have in mind?" "Something that will ensure today's demonstration is remembered for a very long time," he replied with a smile that was both encouraging and slightly unsettling. Admiral Harrison gestured toward the far end of the range, where Sarah could barely make out a small object in the distance. "The final target is positioned at 2,100 yards, he announced to the gathered officials. "This represents the theoretical maximum effective range of the Barrett M82 under ideal conditions." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The distance was beyond anything she had imagined attempting. Through the scope, the target was barely visible even at maximum magnification. She looked up at Admiral Harrison with genuine concern. "Sir, that distance is at the very edge of what's physically possible with this weapon system," she said quietly. "The bullet drop alone will be enormous, and any miscalculation could result in missing by dozens of feet." "I understand the technical challenges," Admiral Harrison replied, "but I also believe you have the knowledge and skill to attempt it." The foreign officials were watching this exchange with intense interest. Sarah realized that Admiral Harrison was taking an enormous risk. If she missed this shot badly, it could undermine everything they had accomplished with the previous 3 hits. The stern-faced official who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. "Admiral, this is an extraordinary demonstration. Are you certain you wish to attempt such an extreme shot?" "I have complete confidence in American equipment and personnel," Admiral Harrison replied diplomatically. Sarah understood the subtext. This wasn't just about hitting a target anymore. This was about demonstrating that American military capabilities exceeded what other nations considered possible. Her success or failure would influence international military relationships and potentially affect billions of dollars in arms sales and defense agreements. She approached the Barrett with a mixture of determination and terror. The rifle that had felt familiar during the previous shots now seemed inadequate for the enormous challenge ahead. She knew from her technical training that at 2,100 yards, Environmental factors would have exponential effects on bullet trajectory. Wind speed, air temperature, humidity, barometric pressure. Even the rotation of the Earth would influence the bullet's path over such an extreme distance. Sarah began calculating frantically, using every piece of physics and engineering knowledge she possessed. The wind had changed again, now coming from the southwest with occasional gusts that she could see stirring dust in the distance. She estimated the speed at 12 to 15 miles per hour, which would push the bullet significantly off course during its flight time of nearly 4 seconds. Temperature was rising as the morning progressed, which would affect air density and bullet velocity. The target was positioned on slightly higher ground than her firing position, requiring additional elevation adjustment. Every variable seemed to compound the difficulty exponentially. Sarah spent 20 minutes making calculations and scope adjustments. She moved the crosshairs so far from the actual target that it seemed impossible the bullet could curve back to hit the center. But the mathematics demanded these extreme corrections. The foreign officials grew restless during her preparation time, but Admiral Harrison remained patient. "Take all the time you need," he encouraged. "Precision requires careful preparation." Finally, Sarah settled into her firing position. The target was so distant that she couldn't actually see it through the scope at her current aim point. She was essentially shooting at empty air, trusting her calculations to guide the bullet to a target she couldn't even observe. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it throughout her entire body. She tried to control her breathing, but the magnitude of the shot made it difficult to find the calm, steady rhythm she needed. "Remember," Admiral Harrison said softly, "you've already proven you can do this. Distance is just another variable to calculate." Sarah nodded and began her firing sequence. She controlled her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause, and began applying smooth pressure to the trigger. The rifle felt steady in her hands despite the enormous stakes riding on this single shot. The Barrett fired with its characteristic thunderous roar, but this time Sarah barely noticed the recoil. She was completely focused on watching through the scope, even though she couldn't see the target at her current aim point. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. At 2,100 yards, the bullet's flight time was long enough for profound doubt to set in. Sarah began to worry that she had made a fundamental error in her calculations, that the bullet was sailing harmlessly into the desert, nowhere near the intended target. The spotters at the target location seemed to take an unusually long time to signal. Sarah wondered if they were having difficulty determining where the bullet had hit, or if it had missed the target area entirely. Then finally, the flags moved. But instead of the simple center hit signal they had used for the previous shots, the spotters were waving frantically and making gestures that Sarah couldn't interpret from such a distance. Admiral Harrison had binoculars trained on the target area. His expression was unreadable as he watched the spotters' signals. The foreign officials were also watching through their own optical equipment, speaking among themselves in urgent tones. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Admiral Harrison lowered his binoculars and turned to her with an expression of amazement. "The spotters are reporting something I've never seen before in 30 years of military service." Sarah's heart sank. She assumed this meant she had missed spectacularly, perhaps by such a wide margin that it had created some kind of safety concern or equipment damage. "What kind of something?" she asked hesitantly. Admiral Harrison smiled broadly. "They're reporting that your bullet didn't just hit the center of the target. It hit the exact same hole as your 1,800-yard shot." Sarah stared at him in confusion. "That's impossible. The 1,800-yard target and the 2,100-yard target are in completely different locations." "No," Admiral Harrison replied. "All the targets from 1,200 yards onward were positioned in a straight line. We moved the target frame to different distances, but we used the same backing material for all your shots." The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had not only made 4 perfect shots at increasing distances, but she had placed each bullet in virtually the same location relative to the target center. The precision was beyond anything that should have been possible, even for the most experienced military snipers. The foreign officials were now engaged in intense discussions, their previous skepticism replaced by what appeared to be concern about the implications of what they had witnessed. Sarah realized that her unexpected success had created a situation that Admiral Harrison might not have fully anticipated. As the magnitude of what she had accomplished began to sink in, Sarah understood that this demonstration would indeed be remembered for a very long time, perhaps longer than anyone intended. The aftermath of the demonstration created a flurry of activity that Sarah had never experienced before. Within minutes of confirming her fourth perfect shot, Admiral Harrison was surrounded by foreign officials asking detailed questions about American training methods, equipment specifications, and personnel selection criteria. Sarah found herself at the center of attention in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. Military officers from different countries approached her with translators, asking about her background, education, and shooting experience. She answered honestly, explaining that she was civilian maintenance staff with no formal military training, but she could see skepticism in their eyes. One official, speaking through a translator, asked directly, "How does a maintenance technician achieve accuracy that surpasses our best military snipers?" Sarah looked to Admiral Harrison for guidance, unsure how much she should reveal about her technical approach to the shots. He nodded encouragingly, so she explained her engineering background and how she had applied mechanical principles to understand the rifle's capabilities. "I approached each shot as an engineering problem," she said. "I calculated bullet trajectory, wind compensation, and environmental factors the same way I would solve any mechanical equation. The rifle is precisely manufactured equipment, and if you understand its specifications, you can predict its performance." The foreign officials exchanged glances, clearly processing the implications of her explanation. If American maintenance personnel possessed this level of technical sophistication, what did that suggest about the capabilities of actual military specialists? As the demonstration concluded and the foreign delegations prepared to depart, Sarah overheard fragments of conversations that concerned her. Officials were discussing the need to reassess their own training programs, equipment procurement, and military readiness. Her success had apparently raised questions about the comparative capabilities of their armed forces. Admiral Harrison approached her as the crowds dispersed. "Technician Martinez, I need to speak with you privately." They walked away from the demonstration area toward a quiet section of the base. Sarah sensed that the Admiral's demeanor had changed from the confident authority he had displayed during the demonstration. Now he seemed thoughtful and perhaps slightly concerned. "What you accomplished today was extraordinary," he began. "But I need you to understand the broader implications of your performance." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully grasped what he meant. Military demonstrations like this one influence international relationships, arms sales, and strategic alliances, Admiral Harrison continued. "Your success today will be reported to defense ministries around the world. It will affect how other nations view American military capabilities." The weight of his words settled on Sarah slowly. She had thought she was simply helping with a demonstration, but apparently she had inadvertently influenced international military policy. "Sir, I was just trying to do my best with the knowledge I had," she said. "I never intended to create any kind of diplomatic situation." "I know," Admiral Harrison replied, "and that's exactly why your performance was so convincing. There was no artifice or deception involved. You simply applied your technical knowledge to achieve results that most people would consider impossible." They walked in silence for a few minutes while Sarah processed this information. She began to understand why Admiral Harrison had invited her to the demonstration in the first place. He had somehow recognized potential in her that she hadn't seen in herself. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Sarah said finally. "Of course. Did you know I could make those shots before you asked me to try?" Admiral Harrison smiled. "I suspected you might have unusual capabilities. In my experience, people who truly understand equipment often perform better than those who simply follow routine training procedures." "But 4 perfect shots at those distances," Sarah protested. "That was beyond anything I thought was possible." "Sometimes exceptional performance emerges when technical knowledge combines with natural ability under pressure," Admiral Harrison replied. "You demonstrated something that our military has been trying to develop for years: the ability to apply engineering principles to tactical situations in real time." As they continued walking, Admiral Harrison explained that Sarah's demonstration would likely result in changes to military training programs. The Pentagon was already interested in incorporating more technical education into sniper training, based on the success she had achieved through mathematical analysis, rather than traditional marksmanship instruction. "What happens to me now?" Sarah asked, suddenly worried about the attention her performance might attract. "That depends on what you want to happen," Admiral Harrison replied. "Your success today has created opportunities that didn't exist yesterday morning. Over the following weeks, Sarah learned just how accurate Admiral Harrison's prediction had been. Military recruitment officers contacted her about joining various branches of the armed forces. Defense contractors offered positions in their research and development departments. Universities extended invitations to complete her engineering degree with full scholarships. The story of the civilian technician who outperformed military specialists spread throughout the defense community, often growing more elaborate with each retelling. Sarah found herself uncomfortable with the attention, and the way her single day of unexpected success was being transformed into legend. Most importantly, she realized that Admiral Harrison had been right about her possessing capabilities she hadn't recognized. The demonstration had revealed that her combination of technical knowledge and intuitive understanding of mechanical systems could be applied to challenges far beyond equipment maintenance. 3 months later, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She accepted a position with a defense research laboratory, where she would work on developing new training methods that combined engineering education with practical marksmanship instruction. Her brother Miguel was proud but confused by the dramatic change in her career trajectory. "I still don't understand how you went from cleaning rifles to being recruited by the Pentagon," he said during one of their weekly phone calls. Sarah smiled, thinking back to that scorching morning in the Nevada desert when Admiral Harrison had asked her to take a shot that changed everything. Sometimes you don't know what you're capable of until someone gives you the chance to find out. The Barrett M82 that she had fired that day was retired from active service and placed in a display case at the base museum, along with a plaque describing the demonstration. Visitors often asked about the civilian technician who had achieved perfect accuracy at impossible distances, but Sarah preferred to let the legend exist without her direct involvement. She had learned that sometimes taking an unexpected opportunity, even when you're not sure you're qualified, can reveal capabilities you never knew you possessed. Admiral Harrison had seen something in her that she couldn't see in herself, and his willingness to take a risk had changed both their lives in ways neither had anticipated. The demonstration had ended with 4 perfect shots. But for Sarah, it had been the beginning of a completely new trajectory.